Hey everyone, it's Mostly Casual Commander. I'm BK. We're on Patreon and Discord, links in the description. We're playing more March of the Machine Commanders, and I brought Sidar Jabari. It's Esper Knight Tribal with reanimation, and I think it's fun. Kyle is taking Zimone Dina back out for a spin. It's a Sultai landfall build, looking to fall some lands. J-Man is playing Azorius Flying Tribal with an Angels sub-theme with Errant Giada as his commander. And lastly, we have Chris piloting GoroGoro and Satoru. Grixis Ninjutsu with dragons, I love it. Before we start the game, we'd like to give a huge shout out to Brian B. for your support on Patreon. Thank you so much. It truly goes a long way of supporting our channel. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, wow, how cool would it be for BK to shout out my name on his YouTube channel? Here's the deal. That could happen. All you have to do is sign up for our Patreon for as little as $1 per month. You'd also have access to our Patreon-only Discord chat, as well as early access to our videos and more. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and stick around for an appearance from my fat cat Meatball. He's so chunky. I start us off by playing Path of Ancestry over to Kyle, who plays a forest, and on to J-Man's turn, he plays an island into a Mystic Remora, hoping to score some early card advantage. J-Man passes the turn over to Chris, who draws and plays an island as his land for turn, and uses that to cast a Brainstorm, triggering J-Man's Mystic Remora and drawing him a card. Chris decides which two cards to put back on top of his library, then Chris gives me the pass back, and onto my turn 2. I draw and then drop Prairie Stream as my land for turn. Following that, I play a Soul Ring, which will trigger J-Man's Mystic Remora, drawing him a card. Then I use Soul Ring to cast Talisman of Progress, also feeding another card to J-Man, but I really wanted that early ramp. Over to Kyle's turn, he plays another Forest as his land, and then casts Lotus Cobra, hoping to generate some manas when he drops lands. Then he passes the turn over to J-Man, who on his upkeep decides that Mystic Remora drew him enough cards, so he does not pay the cumulative upkeep. Plays a Plains before passing to Chris, who draws, and then plays a Mountain as his land, and then passes back to me on my turn 3. I cast Out of the Tombs. This thing can start gaining counters on my upkeep, milling me cards. Then I can reanimate stuff if my library's empty, or possibly lose me the game. If we die, we die. I drop my super fast boots onto the battlefield before giving the pass back to Kyle, and on his turn he plays Jol Rael, Monvali Recluse. He's hoping to start making 2/2 green cats when he draws his second card. Then he plays Demir Aqueduct. That'll bounce a forest to his hand, trigger Lotus Cobra, but with nothing to do, he passes the turn. On Kyle's end step, J-Man flashes in Fairy Mastermind, aiming at drawing some additional cards. On his turn proper, he plays Hengegate Pathway. He leaves Mastermind back on defense and gives Chris a pass back. He plays Sunken Hollow as his land for turn, and then he casts his commander, GoroGoro and Satoru. So if he can get a Hasty Boy to start pinging down his opponents, he can make 5/5 Dargans. On my upkeep, Out of the Tombs triggers, getting 2 counters on it, therefore milling me 2 cards. Then I draw for turn and play Hallowed Fountain, untapped, taking 2 life. And with that on the battlefield, I'll cast my commander, Sidar Jabari of Zalfir. The more I play this deck, the more I like it. I get a Scry thanks to Path of Ancestry, keeping it on top. Then I equip my Lightning Greaves to Sidar and move into combat, swinging at Chris in the air over his GoroGoro and Satoru. So on the attack, I get to draw a card and discard a card. Because I drew my second card, J-Man gets to draw a card. I pitch Benalish Marshal into the bin. Chris takes his beats, which triggers my commander's second ability and reanimates my Benalish Marshal, therefore pumping my team. I pass the turn over to Kyle, who plays his commander, Zimone Dina, so he could start draining opponents, sacking his stuff, drawing cards, and playing additional lands. Then he plays Underground River, triggering Lotus Cobra, and using River and that floating black mana he generated, he casts Bloodghast. This could provide some pretty good sacrificing fodder for his commander because of its landfall ability to come back onto the battlefield. On Kyle's end step, J-Man casts Errant Giada, his commander, and onto his turn proper, he draws, and then he can peep the scene with his commander's ability. At the top of his library, he played Deserted Beach as his land for turn before casting Esper Sentinel. And following that, he casts Rhystic Study. So he's going to draw lots of cards, probably. He gives a pass back to Chris, who plays Path of Ancestry after drawing. And as a follow-up, he plays Phoenix Chick. Probably a good target for ninjutsu because it's cheap cost and evasion. After that, Chris plays Tetsuko Umezawa, Fugitive. Small dudes can't be blocked. J-Man draws from an unsatisfied heuristic study for those 2 cards before Chris moves into combat with Phoenix Chick. He deals 1 point of unblockable damage to J-Man, and then GoroGoro and Satoru makes him a 5/5 Dargon. Onto my turn, I get 2 more Eon counters on Out of the Tombs, milling me a total of 4 cards, putting a knight into my bin, which is relevant. Then I cast Adaptive Automaton, naming Knight, pumping my team again. Also, J-Man draws a card. I move into combat at Kyle, my only good target. On the attack, I draw and discard. This also means J-Man draws, because he's rude. Kyle takes his beats, again triggering my commander's second ability, and then I get a Knight of the White Orchid out onto the battlefield, the card I discarded. This will have me go fetch up a Plains and have that enter my battlefield, and in my second main phase I cast Smothering Tithe. I want constant triggers too, J-Man, so this triggers Rhystic Study and Study Buddy for J-Man. I pass the turn to Kyle, who draws, netting me a treasure token, and then he casts Sky Shroud Claim. So he goes and fetches up 2 forest cards and puts them onto the battlefield. This also draws J-Man a couple more cards and gains me a couple more treasures in the process. Kyle played an untapped Overgrown Tomb in a forest, then a forest for turn, all of those triggering his Lotus Cobra. He activates his commander, killing his own Bloodghast. This will have him draw his second card this turn, triggering his Jol Rael, giving him a 2/2 cat, also triggering J-Man's Mastermind. Nobody paid the costs of Smothering Tithe, so I gain a couple more treasures. And thanks to Zimone Dina, Kyle drops Golgari Rot Farm, again triggering his Lotus Cobra. He'll bounce a forest back to his hand, but float a mana from it first. Then using it, he'll cast Dryad of the Elysian Grove. He can have more lands enter his battlefield. What? He pays for Rhystic Study this time, drops a forest as his, 10th land this turn. Something like that. And with that landfall trigger, he'll return Bloodghast back to the battlefield. And Kyle then casts Oko, Thief of Crowns, diabolical card that turns your commander into not your commander. Then he scans the board state and assesses what his biggest threats are.
Do I care about this?
Yeah. Nope, it just mills me. A lot. And so Kyle activates Oko's +1 ability, making Errant Giada an elk. But it's a 3/3, so that's a thing. He passes the turn to J-Man, who draws, giving me a treasure, and plays Sea of Clouds. Then he casts a free Ornithopter. It's free because its mana value is 0. Then he casts Giada, Font of Hope. She's an angel monodork, or an angel dork, as I like to call her. Then he casts Segovian Angel, a 1/1 flying Vig that gets a +1/+1 counter thanks to Giada. J-Man moves into the red zone, swinging his 3/3 elk and his Mastermind at Oko. Kyle decides to chump block the elk with his cat, and Oko takes 2 points of damage. Over to Chris's turn, he draws, giving me a treasure, and then he jumps right into combat, swinging Phoenix Chick at me, which he ninjutsus out Ninja of the Deep Hours. He also swings a Dargon at J-Man. His unblockable Phoenix Chick turned Ninja draws him a card after it connects with me. Again, drawing J-Man a card, because that was the second one he drew in the turn. His commander triggered, getting him another 5/5 Dragon as well. He drops a Swamp Drop, and then he passes the turn back over to me. On my upkeep, I mill myself 6 thanks to Out of the Tombs. I throw some of the best cards in my deck into my graveyard. Of note, only one of them is a knight, but it's a Hakon Stromgald Scourge, and that's pretty good. I play Temple of Enlightenment as my land for turn, and I scry 1, keeping it on top. I cast Chivalric Alliance as a follow-up to that, aiming at drawing some more cards on my attack step. In an effort to clear the way for an attack, I anguished unmaking J-Man's Giada, but he has a response in the form of a Dovin's Veto, countering my kill spell and having my sadness hit the stack in response. Then I move into the red zone. I would have preferred to have attacked J-Man with my commander as well, but Kyle is the only one that I can make sure its triggered ability gets off. So I draw 2 on my attack. I discard a Cavalier of Night. Both of my attacking creatures have first strike, so they'll deal their damage at the same time, of course. J-Man chumps with Ornithopter. Kyle took his beats, allowing me to reanimate Hakon Stromgald Scourge. He's great! I can cast other knights from my graveyard now. And so I do, getting a Knight Exemplar out onto the battlefield, pumping my knights, and giving them indestructible. What's not to love? I pass the turn over to Kyle, making a treasure when he draws. Then he casts Woodfall Primus. On the cast, Rhystic Study triggers, but he'll go ahead and pay the 1 to satisfy that. And when Woodfall Primus ETBs, he blows up my Smothering Tithe, because Kyle's a Rudy McBooty. Then he activates his commander, sacrificing Woodfall Primus to it. It'll return to the battlefield with Persist. So finishing up Zimone Dina, he'll draw a card, giving J-Man a trigger to draw as well. He gets a 2/2 cat thanks to Joel Rael. He'll drop a Forest onto the battlefield, triggering Lotus Cobra, as well as draining me 2 points of life and him gaining 2 points of life. And he blew up J-Man's Rhystic Study when Woodfall Primus entered the battlefield, given Persist. He +1'd Oko, turning my Hakon into an Elk, and then passing the turn over to J-Man, who plays an island. And then he uses Giada and a number of lands to cast Firemane Commando. This thing says, yo, start drawing more cards, because that's what J-Man needs. It also enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Then he casts Drum Bellower, so now he's going to have pseudo-vigilance, kind of, by untapping his creatures on every untapped step. He doubles down on the same attack he did last turn, swinging his Commander Elk and his Mastermind at Oko. Kyle, again, chump blocks the Elk with his cat, and Oko takes 2 more points of damage. J-Man then passes the turn over to Chris, who plays a Shivan Reef as his land for turn, and then he recasts his Phoenix Chick. It's so cute. He moves into combat, swinging a dragon at me, as well as Oko, and with an unblockable Phoenix Chick, he ninjutsus out Nashi Moon Sage's Scion. And when that connects, it'll trigger GoroGoro as well as Nashi's own ability, so each of his opponents exiles the top card of his library, and Chris can cast one of them using life as opposed to his manas. And Chris assesses that my Etchings of the Chosen was the best available target, so he'll pay his 3 life, and he'll name Dragon, pumping his dragon team. He pays 1 mana to satisfy Study Buddy. He brings out his dragon token thanks to his commander, and ships the turn over to me. On my upkeep, I mill 8 whole cards. This time I'm actually getting a few knights. Among them are knights such as Valiant Knight and Dauntless Bodyguard. If only my Hakon wasn't an Elkon. Right, Kyle? I play Sea of Clouds. Then I jump into combat, swinging all of my indestructible things at Chris, with the exception of my commander hitting Kyle again to ensure that its triggered abilities are hitting the stack. On my attack step, I get to draw 3 whole cards thanks to Chivalric Alliance, J-Man's Firemane Commando, as well as Sidar's ability itself. I throw a Sky Hunter Skirmisher into my graveyard, and Kyle takes his damage. And Chris blocks my Knight of the White Orchid with his bigger dragon. The other creatures will get through, but resolving the first strike damage first means that I get to bring back my Cavalier of Night, and when that enters the battlefield, I'll have it gobble up my little Elk, and when that dies, that'll have Hakon go back into my graveyard, which is infinitely better than him being an Elk. Finishing Cavalier's ability, I blow up GoroGoro and Satoru on Chris's board. And in my second main phase, I get to cast Hakon Stromgald Scourge from my graveyard because it says I can. Awkwardly, I find myself slightly shy on black mana, but we get there with the treasure token. I get a scry thanks to Path of Ancestry, and with Hakon back on the battlefield, I get to cast Valiant Knight for my graveyard. Again, another Lord effect pumping my team, and could grant double strike. Then I cast Sky Hunter Skirmisher for my graveyard as well. Hakon's pretty darn good when you got Knight Tribal. Who would have thought? This might be the most competitive I've been since the incident. On Kyle's turn, he activates his commander, killing his Bloodghast, drawing his second card, giving him a 2/2, draining me 2, and giving him 2 life, getting J-Man a draw off of his Mastermind. And Kyle plays a Flooded Strand thanks to Zimone.
Lotus Cobra's like, yo dog, make a mana, and I'm like, alright.
Following that, he'll play an Undergrowth Stadium as his land for turn, again triggering Lotus Cobra. He floats another mana before casting Frantic Search, and then this will have him draw 2 cards, discarding 2, and untapping the lands he used to pay for it. Then he'll crack Flooded Strand, taking 1 point of life, and going and finding an island. And then he starts making use of all this extra mana he's got laying around, and casts Beast Within on my Lightning Greaves, protecting my commander. I wonder where he's going with this. Well, I get a 3/3, which is great, because I can use a 3/3 token right now. And with Sidar no longer being shroudy, he casts Song of the Dryads on him. Of note, I would like to point out that Kyle is once again a Rudy McBooty, as he turns my commander into a forest. Then he casts Scoot Swarm. Remember this guy? He can make a whole bunch of himself. He drops Wood Elves as a follow-up play, so he'll go find a forest and put it onto the battlefield. When that land enters the battlefield, it'll trigger Scoot Swarm, making him a copy of himself. Then he casts Soul Ring, before passing the turn over to J-Man. On to J-Man's turn, he plays an Ancient Tomb as his land. Then, using that, some other manas, as well as Giada, he casts Bruna, the Fading Light. When this ETBs, not only will it have 3 +1/+1 counters put on it, but he could also go and find a dead thing from his graveyard. In this case, a Valkyrie Harbinger. Giada says, yo, come in, but bigger. And now this thing can start pumping out 4/4s if he's lifelinky enough. J-Man then attacks me with 3 things. I have my Sky Hunter block his flying dude, hoping to gobble that up, and then I have my token block his elk. Why? I don't know. He casts Path to Exile on my Sky Hunter before damage is dealt, so it keeps his Fairy Mastermind alive. I get a basic swamp onto the battlefield. His elk dies, returning his commander to the command zone. My beast token dies, and I regret not blocking with my Cavalier of Night. Now, I've never claimed to be good at this game, but holy cow was that a punt. He passes the turn to Chris, and then he casts his commander, GoroGoro and Satoru again. And remember, on Chris's upkeep, J-Man gets to untap all of his creatures, gumming up the board state quite a bit. Chris recasts Phoenix Chick, little baby. And then he attacks me with all of his stuff, which guess how much damage it is. I can't believe I didn't block with this. That's what's literally costing me this game right now. Very unfortunate. Yep, and then I die, because he dealt exactly 19 damage to me after my misplay. So Chris passed the turn after making a dragon. On Kyle's turn, he activates his commander, killing his 2/2, drawing a card, draining J-Man, making a 2/2 thanks to Joel Rael. Then he casts Morbid Opportunist, hoping to draw cards when things die. As a follow-up, he plays Tendershoot Dryad. He certainly has an Ascend check, giving him the city's blessing. He's got a lot of permanents. We all did. With no good attacks, he passes the turn to J-Man. On his upkeep, he makes a Saproling. J-Man casts Empyrean Eagle, a little airborne lord pumping his flying team. Let me guess, you have flyers.
A little bit.
I know. Feeling confident, J-Man attacks Kyle with all of his airborne stuff.
So this is
reach?
very dumb, but
I'm a fan of dumb.
I do have a small dumb play that I can attempt to do to try to do something. So I will
I'm excited to see what this is now.
have 6 mana to make all my creatures 1/1s, which then kills Woodfall Primus,
Oh, I see what you're doing here.
which then triggers Morbid Opportunist. So I draw a card. And
So I'll gain actually 8 life.
Kind of like how I gained life when I easily blocked with my Cavalier of Night against your stupid token.
But
I promise I'm not really salty. Like I said, I'm not competitive ever since the incident. J-Man casts Linvala, Shield of Seagate, in his second main phase. She enters with a bunch of counters, and on his end step, he'll make a 4/4 that enters with a bunch of counters too. On Chris's turn, he casts Knight's Whisper, hoping to dig for an answer, so he will draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. This triggers J-Man's Mastermind and Study Buddy, so he'll draw 2. Chris plays Temple of Deceit, scrying 1, again, trying to dig as deep as he can for something that can get him out of this. He cycles Reconnaissance Mission, pitching that and drawing, and then he moves into combat. He swings the little baby at J-Man. Before damage, ninjutsu's out, Moon Snare Specialist. When it ETBs, he could bounce something, so he targets the Angel token, and with that ability on the stack, J-Man casts his commander, Errant Giada. He was trying to maximize how many +1/+1 counters would be on it thanks to proper Giada, before the token died. So J-Man took his beats, GoroGoro triggered, giving Chris another 5/5 blocker. Then onto J-Man's turn, he plays an island, and then he casts Archangel of Thune. So when he has an instance of life gain, he can start putting a +1/+1 counter on all of his stuff. That, of course, enters with a bunch of counters on it, and then J-Man moves into the red zone. He attacks with all of his good attackers that are eligible. Chris is forced to chump a whole bunch of this, using all 5 of his dragons to stem the bleeding, and still drops to 16. J-Man will gain some life, and this will proc 2 things. Archangel of Thune, giving a +1/+1 counter on all of his stuff. Then at his end step, he gets another Angel token. And he passes. Chris replays Phoenix Chick. He casts his own Fairy Mastermind. This thing has flying, so in theory he could block. Hopefully that'll be enough. He casts Grazilax, Ithiliad Scholar as well. So now when he moves into combat with Phoenix Chick, he ninjutsu's out Prosperous Thief. When that deals combat damage to J-Man, he'll make a treasure token. He gets to draw a card off of Grazilax. And after that, he'll get a 5/5 dragon from GoroGoro. He draws a card, and unfortunately, it is not an answer. On Chris's end step, J-Man flashes in Spectral Sailor to help try to seal the deal. And on J-Man's turn proper, he moves right into combat, swinging everything, more than enough to knock Chris out of the game. Congratulations, J-Man. Here's Meatball. He's so chunky. And there you have it, that's the game. We're having a lot of fun playing the new commanders from March of the Machine, although that was a very gummy kind of game where we couldn't do a lot with each other's board states. And let's not forget my punt. Thanks again, Brian B., for your support on Patreon, and as always, thanks for watching.